This is the session that will contain the flash summaries of all parallel sessions. It is really impressive to see all the work that we have started around 24 hours ago. There has been a lot of information and a lot of knowledge and a lot of insights that have been shared. It is good to see everyone is still here, and without further ado, I will leave the floor to the rapporteurs of the session. I think we start with Isabel. We'll be presenting the summary of the first parallel session yesterday. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So we had a nice creating and documenting dataset for AI session with 4 outstanding speakers, all coming from very different fields. We had the academic representation by Felix Neumann, which presented the academic efforts that have been done in data science and the needs in terms of transparency and documentation. Then we had two speakers from the industry. We had Emmanuel Carambé and Flora Deringer that both presented ongoing industrial efforts, that is efforts that are currently being done in industry in very high risk, let's say, industrial sectors. We have companies such as Valeo, Airbus, Thales, VDE, Siemens, Bosch participated in these initiatives such as Confidence.ai and the AI Trust label, which they presented. And finally, we had Keisha Schmilinski, who's responsible for the Data Nutrition Project, which is an approach that is widely adopted in the community for documenting datasets. So we had very interesting discussions, and which ended into this prioritization exercise that is very simplified, but contains the most relevant outcomes of our discussion. So when it comes to think about what should standardizers or people working in the European AI Act, policymakers working on the regulation of AI, the advice of our experts was that the most important thing is to provide the standards for the regulation of data preparation processes, including the language to be used and the standards for labeling data. Also, they highlighted the need for automatic tools that indicate how good or bad or the quality of dataset specification, that it's really automating these tools, not doing all the manual work that is currently done. However, these two initiatives are very important, but also very difficult to implement in real operational settings. On the other side, we have initiatives that are equally important and that would be easier to implement. And we highlighted two of them. The first one is to standardize checklists for conformity assessment to check that a given data set is compliant with a given regulation by means of checklists that would help also editors to check this conformity. And on another initiative that could be easily implemented and very important would be to establish standards for really mapping the provenance of data sets. Where do they come from? From the sources to the final AI system, the final product, no? to follow all the data lineage and provenance of these data sets. And we can move to the next panel. I think it's you, Alexandra.
Yeah, thank you so much, Isabel. So our second panel was on data quality and bias examination and mitigation in AI. And here the idea was to look at data inside AI systems and how we can test the quality of this data, how we can ensure the quality of this data to have non-biased, inclusive, and trustworthy AI systems in all the different steps of their making and on the deployment, on the marketing, etc. We had also 4 very knowledgeable and very expert participants from both from academia, from the University of Granada, Dr. Francisco Herrera, and Dr. Fred Morstatter from the ISI California. We also had from, let's say, from a research institution, we had Dr. Erasmus Adler from the Fraunhofer ISE. And we also had Dr. David Reichel from the Fundamental Rights Agency. So we could see both the academic research perspective as well as the perspective of practitioners, of those who really require this kind of standards and guidelines in order to make sure that the systems that we are using, the AI systems that we are that we can buy, that we can employ, are in line with fundamental human rights. We have gone through the different stages of our work, looking at first brainstorming on what aspects need to be standardized. And here is the remaining part. So what we didn't take into the matrix, I think we can already go to the next slide, where you can see that we have also taken into account. So of course, when data is already employed in an AI system, there still needs to be an accounting done on the provenance of the data, like Isabel mentioned, and thorough testing of the quality of the data. In fact, we have actually started from the observation that we don't really have a good definition of quality, and that there are different initiatives, there are descriptions of what quality in data means, but in fact, specifically for AI systems, this is not yet the case. So there has to be first also a definition of actually what aspects of quality we refer to when we are talking about AI systems, and also how this can be truly assessed. We can go on to the perhaps the last slide, which is more visible, where we can see the aspect that from the discussions turned out to be perhaps the most urgent and important. Not easy. Most of them are quite difficult. But for example, as next steps, we thought that the definition of quality first, of fairness are also important. Also the definition of AI, because there is also there needs to be a clear definition of what we refer to when we refer to AI systems. Further on, to define risk assessment criteria for AI models, and how and the data that goes into these kind of systems. Also, what does it mean that a model, so data is seen as a model, what does it mean that this model fails? What are the failure criteria? And also define a clear set of methodologies that have to be applied in order to test the robustness of models. For example, now there's adversarial attacks that are being used in order to test this robustness. Perhaps we can think of a list of such methodologies in order to make sure that that models are really tested thoroughly before they are being packaged into systems. We also talked about the need to have a way of assessing the quality of off-the-shelf AI models and tools. Nowadays, there are more and more availability of such already trained models and AI tools that are based on different kinds of data. So we sometimes we have to one, open the black box and be able to understand what kind of data has gone into these models and what are the quality characteristics of the data that went into these models or AI tools, and also have ways to ensure that there is a compatibility. So we need to have a set of guidelines or a set of standards that say what kind of tools, what kind of quality these models and tools need to fulfill in order to be applied to certain domains. So what can be used from one domain to another, what can be, exactly what characteristics and what quality aspects need to be fulfilled in order to apply these off-the-shelf models. Then we go to the difficult and important part. So, of course, again, we have the quality. We talk about the quality of the data as raw data, of course, but that is more in the first panel. But we also talk about data as a model, and we have to take into account the fact that even here there needs to be a better understanding of exactly how do we assess quality, and also to have specific tools to assess this quality. There is an understanding that even if data is quality and it's not biased, and we took care that it's of good provenance, we know that it's high quality, although of course the quality still needs to be further refined as what it means. We also need to to create standards to assess whether the models the models have actually learned the right thing, and also define what this right thing means. We also said that it's also difficult and also important that models that are trained on data collected for other purpose and that are being repurposed for creating new models should also be, there should also be guidelines and standards on what kind of data and how exactly those can be repurposed. And we also talked about the need to define certain limits in mitigation of bias, because we're talking about mitigation of bias from data and creating models that we show that are doing better, they don't contain bias, but also that we need also to define guidelines on how to describe the limits in this bias mitigation inside these models, and to show also cases where mitigation was not possible. And finally, the tools to assess all this, we thought that they are crucial. They are not so easy to define, but they are an important part of making sure that all the models that are created and the way in which they are then included in systems, and then in which the systems are being deployed and sold and distributed is the right way. Thank you so much. I now give the floor to the next panel, Songül.
Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. So our session was about data for AI for education and employment. And of course, we also had some outstanding speakers. Among them were Dee Masters, a barrister at the Law Office from Cloisters in the UK, focusing on AI discrimination and employment. We had Nicoletta Giannuzzo, who is a scientific officer at the European Commission's Joint Research Center with a focus on digitalization and education. And Enrique Fernandez Macias, scientific officer at the European Commission's Joint Research Center with a focus on emerging technologies and employment. So the two main challenges that we spoke about mostly were transparency and power imbalances. And we have to consider one specific aspect to education and employment is that they embed culture-dependent social relationships between employers and employees, between teachers and students, with socially internalized definitions of the role that each agent plays in that relationship. And so implementing AI applications into these structures and systems risks affecting these relationships, and this could create power imbalances that were not there before, or reinforce existing power imbalances. And these power imbalances also occur because of the unique issues of opacity and complexity that come with AI applications. Therefore, the biggest challenge identified was actually transparency. And by transparency, we talked a lot about that aspect a lot, is that we mean transparency of what data, for example, is used, how data is used, what decisions are made based on this data, but also transparency of the actual algorithms, so which are often black boxes, and also transparency about the rules of the algorithm. That is, clearly defined boundaries on what roles AI systems play in the workplace and in schools. So the speakers also agreed that we need to address the risk of algorithms overstructuring and completely restructuring the dynamics of these relationships that that have grown historically and are socially embedded. And we start to play by the rules. And one problem is that if the algorithm starts overstructuring, we start to play by the rules of the algorithm instead of the other way around, how it's supposed to be. So clear boundaries will have to be drawn to protect agency and autonomy of students and workers. For that, our speakers have also suggested solutions, such as, for example, an individual right to understandable personalized explanations for algorithmic decisions, but also governance mechanisms such as social dialogue mechanisms between employers and employees, but also between AI providers, schools, and teachers. Other potential solutions include data reciprocity mechanisms or external data trusts for evaluation and validation. But for all these solutions and, for example, standards for transparency, we will need to be clear about terminology and metrology. And this is also why many of the aspects you see in the matrix, many of the challenges you see in the matrix are actually put in the first two columns. And we need to be clear about the terminology and metrology first before we can actually move to performance characterization. And generally, one very important and potentially easy challenge to address is to define a clear common terminology on AI and data-related matters, such as bias versus discrimination, which has different meanings in the tech context or in the legal context, or even transparency and accuracy, which are not clearly defined yet, and we need to maybe also exploit existing mechanisms or existing initiatives that have worked on trying to define these terms. Finally, one important and potentially feasible challenge is actually to draw red lines for certain tasks that we do not want to have performed by AI alone. For example, when it comes to the performance assessment of workers or students. And for example, the AI Act already sets actually a good example for that with its risk-based approach to regulating AI systems. Thank you very much. And these were the results of our panel. And I will now give the floor to Isabel again.
Yes, so here I am again for presenting the results of the law enforcement panel. We had four prominent speakers in the field of law enforcement with different backgrounds and coming from different institutions. We had Patrick Rother from the NIST, National Institute for Standardization of the US. And Patrick has been in the last 20 years leading the NIST face recognition vendor test, which is the de facto standard for validating face recognition algorithms. Then we had Javier Rodriguez. Javier is the CEO of Herta. It's a face recognition company. It is an SME with headquarters in Barcelona. And he shared with us the view of an SME that has to comply with ongoing regulation on AI. Then we had Robin Allen, who is a lawyer and also a judge. So he specialized on algorithmic discrimination, and he pointed out that law enforcement and AI goes beyond face recognition. We used to think only about face recognition, but indeed there are many other facets and many other tools that are used in court for court decisions that are based on AI. So he presented some of those. And finally, we had Captain Rosalía Machín Prieto. She's a captain from La Guardia Civil, which is a law enforcement agency in Spain. I would say the most important one in Spain. And she stressed the need for law enforcement agencies to use AI, but at the same time, trustworthy AI. So she also presented some interesting real operational settings she faces in her daily life, at work. So, well, the 4 main points, we had a lot of sticky notes and a lot of ideas arise, but as I have limited time to explain the most important outcomes, we can see them in this prioritization matrix. So we have difficult challenges in the law enforcement sector in front of us. So first of all, they all agreed, 4 speakers agreed on that the most challenging, the most prominent challenge right now is to take into account discrimination. So algorithms, AI algorithms need to be universal. Universality meaning that they have to be non-biased, non-discriminative, factors such as gender, age, but also ethnicity and also disabilities. People with disabilities, we lack databases that are balanced in that sense. And they all agreed that this is the more important point, but also the most difficult to achieve. Also, especially Rosalía Machín, that takes part into real life operations from law enforcement agencies. She said it is important to standardize interoperability issues, not only for making data interoperable, which has been raised in other fields and in previous panels, but also when it comes to communications, for instance, and not only interoperability between LIAs and artificial intelligence, but also between LIAs versus no law enforcement agencies, institutions, for instance, for the collaboration with private companies or the collaboration with governments, both at the national and the European level. And finally, they highlighted the need for standards for bias measurement and mitigation. So how to measure bias. We need standards for this. We need standards to establish red lines for bias and also to guarantee that bias is also according to the geographic setting where the AI system is going to be used. It's going to be deployed. However, these are the 3 more difficult point, but most important points to achieve. Something that is important as well, but easy to implement, that could be done relatively fastly and with little resources, is training. Training law enforcement agencies, training judges, training the wide public on the uses that can be the uses of AI in law enforcement, how they can be used and the limitations they have, but also the benefits for society. No? So it's about outreach and training. And that's it for the law enforcement. I leave the floor to the next one. Not sure if it is Mauricio.
Mauricio.
Yeah, it's me. I'm not going to be repetitive because a lot of topics have been discussed at the session were also the same one identified by my colleagues. First, the panel was with 3 distinguished speakers, Karen Coxon from FCA in the UK, Andrea Caccia as chair of the SNLEC blockchain group, and Jörg Osterider, sorry if I don't pronounce properly the name, from the University of Twente in Zurich. The speakers, they underlined the concrete implications of improper use of data into the financial sectors, and the possible consequences for discriminatory outcomes, and also in discriminatory outcomes in profiling possible customers of the financial sector. And then they indicated the difficulty to move from the context dependency of this process to a proper method and model to use horizontally and universally. There was a big debate about the need to have data quality as a precondition for the use of AI in the finance sector. But the speakers also and the participants recognized the difficulty to ensure the data quality model, not only in the AI, but also in other uses of big data, including machine learning and extrapolating profiling from existing databases. The important element that been indicated was first the need of a common terminology, and also the definition of some key elements, including the notion of fairness, having also in mind the fact that, as I said at the beginning, there is this link between the definition of the concept a priori and then embedding this in also the algorithm design, and the definition of the bias with regard consequences that result from the practical uses of data, then a posteriori. There are different models to face these specific problems, and both have pro and cons. There was also a discussion about societal discussions about all the possible decision-making processes based on AI in the sector. The need to have standard guidelines for model training and testing, but it was also underlined the fact that the data quality models should not be AI specific to avoid unnecessary compliance costs, and discussion on data used for AI is part of a bigger discussion also on the use of data in general. And then, the clarification of these elements are important for the data collection and processing also in the big data debate. These are the main elements resulting from that. There were still some open questions, in particular on the methodology and whether to approach the assessment of the best models to avoid the bias resulting from qualitative or quantitative analysis, and it was recognized the fact that quantitative elements should ensure also the objectivity of this process. Then I think this was the beginning of the discussion that still needs several steps to be operational. And I leave the floor to my colleague of the next panel.
Thank you very much, Maurizio. So, and the next session was media, AI for media applications, including social media. Here, unfortunately, we were supposed to have also Maya Pantik from Imperial College London. Also, she's also associated to Meta, and also Manuel Gomez from Max Planck Institute, but they have let us know yesterday that they are not able to join. But we had two outstanding panelists, Simeon Papadopoulos from the Center of Research and Technology, ELAS, and Jochen Leitner, who is from Coburg University, but he has a very strong background in text mining, natural language processing systems, and he was the director of research in Thomson Reuters for many years. So from this panel, just as a first starting note, of course, AI for media, including social media, is not part of the high risk category in the AI Act. However, we chose to look at AI in media, including social media as well, given the societal relevance that it has, and also the fact that it is made an object in the obligations under AI Act, and also is a focus in the Digital Services Act. Of course, talking about media contains text, images, videos, and audio. So there are many different aspects that we look at when we are talking about AI employed to media analysis. From starting with our speakers, Simeon talked about the need to face the notion of bias in AI when applied to media. So the need to define what bias actually means when we're talking about media, AI applied to media. He also stressed the fact that there should be consideration on the link between individual and group fairness. So sometimes systems that are created for bettering, for improving the individual use of AI systems are actually deterring group use, and vice versa. He also stressed on the fact that access to data sets is key to understanding bias and assessing the impact of systems, and stressing also on the fact that when we are talking about AI on media, there is a gap between the availability of good data sets and large data sets to the research community versus key players in the media, especially social media scene. So there was a request also to make such big data sets from particularly media companies available also openly to the bigger research community, in order to make sure that we are able to create openly also good AI models based on this data, and that we also have as such a method to compare different AI models produced with different types of technologies among themselves. He also stressed the fact that we need to create benchmarking data sets, and there is also a need to understand what good benchmark data sets mean in the context of AI and media, and especially now the requirements of the new technologies to have large quantities of data in the training sets for the deep learning technologies, and also to reassess what makes a good benchmarking data set depending also on the application domain. Also, the need to audit data sets and define guidelines for compliance, the same issue with defining what exactly quality data means in this context, and what bias in this data means in this context. And of course, the application scenarios that are included here, like disinformation and fake news. And here we talk about the AI that is also used to create fake content, but also the propagation of false or misleading or misinformation or disinformation based on algorithms optimizing content for specific users. There was also a big discussion around the business model in media and AI used for the media. Of course, this is a big, let's say, can of worms, and the fact that we are now all the business models are centered around attention as main generator of revenue, and by not regulating this kind of business model, we sort of support the creation of such attention grasping uses of AI in the media. Dr. Jochen Leitner, he stressed that media and news are sensitive domains as far as AI is concerned. And he also stressed on the potential risk for public perception manipulation and for third actor purposes. He underlined that quality assurance data is a complex issue because of high implications from bias data may occur. He said that standardization should be the codification of existing best practices, and here we also require the definition of best practices and what this means in the context of AI and media, and that there has to be more openness to be able to test also off-the-shelf models in the context of text mining, for example. There are many off-the-shelf models that are being generously offered to the research community, but indeed there needs to be also a lot of a standardization and guideline effort to make sure that we know exactly what data has been used in order to create these models, and what quality assessment tests have been performed on them, and exactly what other use cases are relevant for this type of data and for these type of models, because in many cases the same models that are very good in some tasks have been shown to be very good in some tasks are still also used in other cases where their accuracy may not be so high. So just going to the final slide because I'm over time. So yeah, the easy and important is this access to media data by actors other than producing companies, defining quality in benchmarking data sets, making these representative data sets open to research communities, and defining dimensions of quality in the data, creating specialized data sets to assess bias and test bias in the different areas of the media, so both text, audio, video, and image, but also like multimodal specialized data sets to assess bias from the different points of view. And then what is difficult and important is the taxonomies and vocabularies to talk about the different issues in the different areas of AI in the media, testing quality, the quality of off-the-shelf data and models, and having a clear description of what data was used, how, what the process followed was, and sort of have clear guidelines on opening the black boxes. Of course, what is also difficult but important to do is to not continue to support business models that are or perhaps I shouldn't say this, but to be more wary of the fact that some business models based on attention might skew the AI generation process in the media. And finally, define standards for dataset auditing and define compliance and representativeness, especially because we're dealing with such a sensitive field. And with this, I give the floor to the next, to Claudius, who is moderating the medicine and healthcare panel.
Thanks, Alexander. I will try to share the slides to summarize. Let's see whether that works. Can you see the screen?
Perfectly, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you very much. We had a really terrific session on AI for medicine in healthcare with an excellent panel. We had Alpo Veri, who is research director at the University of Tampere in Finland, but also a key player in standardization activities. Koen Cobbert from Philips, also active in standardization with a very deep insight, of course, in medical applications, medical devices, essentially also. Sandra Kuke, my colleague from the JRC, with insight also in toxicological applications, and a broad spectrum of experiences in health and different applications. And then Thorsten Pintz from the VDE Health, also active in standardization. So my name is Claudius Griesinger. We had I was moderating and telling you now also Jersey and telling you now the results. So first of all, allow me a little word cloud very quickly. A few things that sort of popped up either in the statements of the panelists, also repeatedly in the discussion. There was talk about regulatory jungle and also of some difficulties and hurdles in relation to the GDPR, the MDR, the difficulties there for companies to comply, and a remark that potentially some companies look for this sort of the wellness corner to avoid things that are perceived as quite burdensome. The AI requirements of data provision to authority, Act requirements of data provision to authorities and notified bodies was also mentioned as potentially a problem. This connects to maybe the solution of bringing algorithms to data instead of vice versa, and also the federated machine learning. There was also strong input to say data are essentially, of course, a human product. We design and make data somehow. We have to keep that in mind also to really address beforehand the data, even if they're balanced and seemingly representative, to really go deep into the data and see where they're coming from. All players should be kept in mind. Of course, this is more an economical comment, also SMEs, that this is feasible. Ensure that the innovativeness is maintained in the EU, keep the sweet spot between trustworthiness and burden. That comes a bit back to some of the perceived hurdles. And moving from the black box to the white box, so also about intelligibility, explainability and transparency, of course, that is at the heart of the matter. And maybe quality labels for data as a way forward. And I think a very important point of the panel discussion was that it's more important maybe to have a methodology for descriptors, data descriptors, metrology, and not necessarily detailed thresholds or metrics per se. So with the kickoff questions, we come to the upper part, challenges, etc. How to do it, just generally. Can the diversity of application cases in health, because health is the sector with, at the moment, the highest number of application cases in principle, can the horizontal standards really serve that variety? So I think the panel, in a way, addressed that by saying, check the standards that are really developed, the horizontals that are being developed, and see whether they're fit for health, to which extent it, of course, developed and further documentation if needed. And on the second, what's the role of specific guidance? I think also here the panel very much agreed that guidance could be important as a first line element instead of rushing directly into full standards, especially with the vertical requirements for sector specific requirements, to first go into the guidance before rushing into standards, and see always whether the horizontal ones are actually fit for purpose, also for the specific requirements for health. Now, this is quite busy, but just let me explain you. On the top, we see basically the legend here. We had just outlined the 7 requirements of trustworthy AI, highlighted in the high-level expert group document advising the Commission. And then we have the data creation related stuff in light blue, AI system created stuff in dark blue, and the AI system marketing in black. And so what was mentioned here, of course, important is terminology. That's very high level, as we heard before. Maybe there are different terminologies used even by the Commission document, by the WHO for ethical AI use in health. So maybe there is a need. It's quite easy maybe to do this, but to harmonize a little bit. There was talk about the data statistics or characterization, also symmetry of data sets. We had here quite a string of very detailed and relevant elements, potentially for checking data quality in view of purpose. So legal compliance, of course, balancedness, completeness, correctness, the bias testing methodologies, representativeness, consistency, currentness, and of course also the labeling of data, especially for supervised machine learning. As I said before, the data the focus was a bit on methodology and not so much on metrics. So rather go on a methodology to explain to people how to describe their data and measure them, the different aspects. Anonymization, of course, pseudonymization is important. There was mention of some aspects out there that are under development, the tripod AI and probust AI also for bias testing. Now, there was also input by the panelists to say there should be indication how to define what is a good set or size of a data set without maybe saying it has to be like this and this, because that depends on how high your accuracy is that you want to reach and under which confidence level, of course. So another aspect was data visualization. And of course, also here for the creation of the AI system, the algorithmic bias and the set independence, etc. So I'm moving in the interest of time and move on. So you see quite a lot of different aspects coming in. It's getting a little bit simpler. We're trying to now to condense things a little bit. So if we go in the matrix, what runs really through is what I said now several times, really what establish a methodology as a standards guidance to really make state-of-the-art measurements, descriptors, protocols for modular metrics and thresholds, not providing the metrics and the thresholds per se, but providing guidance or standards on how to do that and what to observe, I would think, in purpose, in view of the intended use and purpose is very important. In view of the safety and security, there was also the proposal that there should be guidance or standards on AI system creation for these aspects, which would also, of course, encompass cybersecurity, which is very important and also permeating the entire development pathway. And a proposal to have, and that comes back also to transparency, responsibility, and maybe even accountability, to have a guidance for developers, how to document the AI system, the applicability, the domain, the limitations, the use scenarios, the risks, but also what are the data, so the whole data descriptors behind that, and the data use. So I mentioned again, maybe not always possible to provide the data per se, all the data. So this was a strong input, but to provide rather the information of what is behind those data, where do they come from, etc. It's a difficult line to walk, of course. So coming to the end on the prioritization, I start with easy and important terminology, as I said, high level, but also the technical one. Songul just mentioned. I think that's also relevant in our session here, bias versus non-discrimination, but also the higher level, as I said, the different, in the health sector, different terminologies used, for instance, by the OECD, by the Commission document, by the WHO document, overlapping, but not identical. Data passport and model. Then horizontal standards developed, examine whether these are sufficient for health. Yeah, so that's clear. If not, then maybe act on that, develop guidance or other standards that are sectorial for health and for the specific applications, because they are very wide-ranging. Statistical characterization of data sets, balancedness, representatives, etc. Sort of between difficult and easy, but definitely felt important, or even a little bit higher or step before the criteria for data descriptors in view of the purpose. Actually give people maybe a workflow in the hand and say, define your purpose first, and then think what are the data that you require and where do you get the data from? How do you describe and characterize these data? And then maybe do the statistics. Non-discrimination, but also personalization was here put up in sort of rather difficult maybe, but important. Non-discrimination, of course, very highly important. And that comes a bit back maybe to this point, methods for establishing recombinable metrics in view of a data passport. And I think with this, I close. So also there, a lot of food for thought, I think, for everybody. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Claudius. And finally, we arrive at the last parallel session, industrial automation and robotics. And I think our colleague Vasiliki will present the summary.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I know we are running out of time. I will try to be as fast as possible. So we had for this session, Industrial Automation and Robotics, we had an excellent panel of 4 scholars, mainly for industry. Adil Amhad, who is a product safety and regulatory engineer at Thermo Fisher Scientific in the Netherlands. Aurélie Claudic, who works, she's a specialist in human-robot interaction in NITI in Toulouse, France. Roland Behrens, who is a senior scientist at Fraunhofer IFF in Germany, and Emmanuel Kahebwe, who is a chief executive officer at VDE. So what was mentioned from the beginning of this session was that robots are exiting their caves. So they are entering the physical human environment, and in different forms, for example, as industrial robotic arms or delivery robots or social robots or even automated vehicles. And the domains of application are vary a lot. So there is a large variability, and this already is a challenge for standardization. It brings unique opportunities, apparently, but sometimes the environment that they function are unstructured, uncontrolled, and this poses many challenges, not only for the execution of for their function, but also for the standardization of robotics and human-robot interaction. So there were some initial, so you can see the brainstorming part, which is not the brainstorming, the matrix, where we have these yellow stickers and the blue stickers. The yellow are mainly the challenges and the needs that were identified during the session, and the blue ones are the proposals and that our speakers talked about it during the session regarding the standardization. And I am going to briefly go through the 3 phases of the product development. So from the data creation to up to the system deployment and marketing, but something that it was transversal during across all of these phases was the safety issue. Robots, as I mentioned, they are navigating our physical environment, and human safety and the system robustness is of paramount importance. So the speakers mentioned that we need technical specifications that ensure system robustness, and that might be either data-driven methods, based on data-driven methods, or on model-based validation approaches. It was mentioned that simulation is considered a valuable tool. Not always, we can't always test in the real environments. So validation, simulation is one of the tools that our panelists were proposing to be used. But on the other hand, we need to be careful about the ecological validity of such methods. There were it was mentioned that especially for the last phase of the product development, we need to consider users. So the user should be, the human should be in the loop. And this brings also the issue of not only having objective metrics for the development of the standards, but also some subjective metrics and qualitative assessments. One of our speakers mentioned the method of smart safety, which would include the use of model-based methods to check whether the robot actions and micro behaviors and plans are within safety boundaries before they are executed as a whole. It was also given special attention to the human fundamental rights throughout all the the life circle of the product development, especially for vulnerable populations, like children or people with special needs, etc. Regarding the data creation, the data sets, it was mentioned that especially for robots, we often have data collection that might need extra attention in order to be cleaned from the noise or from data that are not intended to be connected. Just because robots navigate the physical environments, data that even violate human privacy might be collected, and for this we need to develop special methods when we develop our standards for robots and human-robot interaction. Lastly, we tried to prioritize some of those concepts, and you can see on the left side of the screen that our panelists proposed that something that we need to have, it is quite easy to have, is to have guidelines for the stakeholders to navigate and adopt different standards in the field, including their interplay and checklist for robotic conformity procedures. That brought also the issue of terminology. So they mentioned that we need common taxonomies when it comes to robotics and human-robot interaction. These would help different stakeholders to be involved in the development of standardization. It was mentioned that the education and certification of professionals for assessment of robotics solution is something that we also need. And then what it is very important to have, but difficult to achieve, is to develop model-based safety validation and certification, and even more difficult to develop validation certification, which is purely data-driven and model for model-free systems. So just to conclude here, we can say that in robotics we also share the same concerns, challenges as other applications, but in addition to that we have the aspect of the physical interaction and human safety from a physical perspective. Thank you very much. This was it from my part.
Thank you so much, Vasiliki. And now we will move on to the final panel discussion on ways forward that will be moderated by Emilia Gomez. Emilia, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexandra. I guess you can hear me. As Alexandra said, my name is Emilia Gomez. I'm leading the Humane team at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. We are an interdisciplinary team which do research on the impact of AI on human behavior. We also relate to the concept of trustworthy AI, and some members of the team like Isabel Dupont, Vicky Carisi, and Songul Tolan have been in here in this workshop, so you know them already a bit. So it's my pleasure to chair this final panel discussion on ways forward. So we have seen a summary of the different sessions and also on how we have to combine more sectorial and horizontal considerations on standards and data and bias and AI. So I wanted to first maybe introduce in the next slide to the rationale of and how we will interact. Of course, you are already well aware of this hashtag standards for AI that you can use in social media and also in Slido. And I will be collecting the questions, your questions, and also if the Zoom chat should only be used for technical, so I will be collecting your question on Slido, and I think also having your camera and audio off to save a little bit of bandwidth. And for this panel, we have, I think we are a little bit late in the program, so we have more or less like 75 minutes. So I will start counting a little bit my time. And we are very happy to have 6 great panelists that come from different areas, different domains, different perspectives, also strongly connected to standards and AI. So maybe let me introduce them. Maybe I mean they are displayed, but I will be maybe introducing them later a little bit when I ask the first question. So we will start, and I guess we won't be using slides, I think, in this panel. So I will maybe like to ask maybe we can stop sharing the screen, and maybe the panelists can show their faces so we can see them. And yeah, and then you can all maybe having this gallery view, then you can see all of them. So I will be introducing them one by one, maybe in different orders that we had at the slide. So and the first question I wanted to ask them is about, I mean, we have seen different perspectives, different discussions, and I think some of them are very similar. But from your own perspective and your own expertise and your own link with the standards and the standardization, well, I would like to first ask our panelists to introduce themselves, also to say a little bit more about the background, and then also the aspects that caught their attention from your perspective, and also the concrete steps that you see towards trustworthy AI. In particular, are respected also to that, as this the topic of today. So the first speaker, and I'm very happy to have someone with the namesake is called. So it's not usual that I find someone called Emilia. So yeah, it's very happy for to have this, and I would like to introduce Dr. Emilia Tantar. She's a Chief Data and AI Officer at Blockchain in Luxembourg. And she brings a little bit her experience on AI standardization. She's part of the Sensenelec GTC 21 Strategic Advisory Group, and she is also a member of the AI Standard European Observatory for ICT Standards. So she has a lot of experience in standards and also in industry. So I would like to ask you, Emilia, on your perspective, on your first take on this workshop and the ways to move forward.
Thank you, Emilia. Indeed, it is a real pleasure to be here, and it is the first time to have this my first name. It was an amazing workshop, so I have participated in one of the workshops yesterday, and the exchanges were really, really rich. The perspective from my side for today will be an SME perspective. As you see, I'm co-chair of the Digital SME Alliance Focus Group on Artificial Intelligence, and inside the European Digital SME Alliance, we are trying to make a bridge between artificial intelligence, data, and standards. So we have 3 different working groups, and we're working together on that. And one point that was brought to my attention by the workshop, and which was really prominent, it was having an inclusive environment where science, SMEs, and all the stakeholders, I would say not-for-profit and industrial organization, they work together. As convener of the working group 2, which is operational aspects in Joint Technical Committee 21, I had the chance to evolve from a scientist perspective in 2017 when we had the advent of standardization, artificial intelligence. I joined and I learned how to become a standardization expert. So, and then now I'm heading the delegation of Luxembourg in standardization. But this journey was possible thanks to some support, external support, which we had nationally, and which is quintessential for standardization experts. And I would mention here StandICT, which played an important role, which is a European initiative. From the SME's perspective on data, and I will provide here some links that I already prepared, we had a position paper on how data and data quality affects SMEs and standards. So 3 solutions we see: inclusive environment for SMEs that I already mentioned, participation in the upcoming regulatory sandboxes, to the issues that we also identified. First of all, it was data quality, which we identified in Recital 44, Article 10.3. You have the reference there to the paper. SMEs, they treat tailor-made data analysis. So it is really difficult to provide error-free, complete data. But I think this was already discussed and it's evolving. So we hope to see in standards an evolution of the data quality concept. Then we have also a pragmatic solution that we see data in the AI system is part of the AI supply chain, which is a long supply chain. But it is an essential part in the conformity assessment process. And I will point here to another reference that we find a solution. The Working Group 2 operational aspects in Joint Technical Committee 21 at European level treats conformity assessment. And we are currently working on technical report on conformity assessment. So I would encourage all scientists, all participants. We already have the colleagues from the European Commission. I see Antonio, I see Salvatore, which are already participating in this. Would be great to have also the insights that the workshop provides. I saw it was impressive wrap-ups that we saw presented earlier, to have them included as an opinion from this 2 days workshop, incredible work, to have them included in this technical report on conformity assessment on the part of the data. Of course, I would encourage also all colleagues to follow in standardization. We have a dedicated ad hoc group on data, and they can do more meaningful work on data quality. That would be my take for the moment.
Okay, thanks a lot, Emilia. So it was very interesting to see the perspective also for the more practical point of view and the more actual need to implement that and to have it in real world scenarios, I would say. So I wanted to maybe give the floor now to our second panelist. I think Salvatore Scalzo already join us, and more from the policy perspective. Salvatore Scalzo is a policy and legal officer in the field of artificial intelligence at the European Commission at the DG Connect, and he has been one of the people behind the AI Act, so he's very much involved in that. And I wanted to also to ask him from his perspective, which are the main challenges that we are addressing now in connection with standards and trustworthy AI, and which are the concrete steps towards trustworthy AI. Salvatore, so can you are you
Yes, I'm
yes.
there. I'm there, and I hope
Good.
you. Unfortunately, my video is blocked, so I don't know if there is a problem from the other side, but it's not a problem as long as my voice reaches you.
Yes, we hear you very well. Yes, perfectly.
In fact. Yeah. Can you
And
retry?
yeah, I've tried now, so hopefully now it works.
Now we see you. Yes.
Hello, and thanks a lot, first of all, for the organization and the invitation. We are very pleased to be there, and for me, and it's linked to the question. So to be frank, I would like also to make this introductory statement that this is really an ideal initiative, what GRC and CNELEC have organized in these days, because it's really the reflection of the challenge we have in front of us, which is basically to understand the needs from the regulation, organize in an informed manner the standardization activities, and mobilize the overall community around it. So the different also stakeholders involved in the issues. For me, the way, I mean, this workshop is probably a summary of not only the challenges that we have in front of us, but also some indications on how we could address them in a very smart and participative manner. So that is for me, because you refer to the challenges. The challenges with the AI Act is, of course, the complexity and the novelty of the technology in question. And the link to that is the timeline related to the AI Act. We are fully aware of that because, I mean, it's difficult to work on precise scenarios, but you are very much aware that we are looking into a possible application date of the new rules at some point in 2025, based on the current estimations. Of course, we will see what happens in the Council and in the Parliament. Of course, that timeline is challenging because we need the standards available, let's say, around a few months, 3-6 months. That's our estimation before the application date. So the timeline is challenging for everyone, in particular, the standardization community. In order to have that, we have tried, as you're well aware, to also anticipate the efforts from our side. So we have engaged with them in early stage, and I'm very grateful, actually, also for the constructive collaboration so far. and to launch a first solid mandate to the standardization organizations before the adoption of the regulation, which is quite a new, a novelty approach, I would say. But that is, I would say, the proof of our commitment. So to make sure that they can start the activities already now on the basis of a solid mandate. That's, of course, the best we could offer from a timing perspective on our side. Then the second important challenge, and I guess this has been discussed over the last 2 days, is the fact that we are dealing also with societal issues. Sorry. So the AI Act is about safety, health, and fundamental rights. So there are fundamental right implications in the standards that we will write. So it is definitely important. I mean, you cannot say a priori how you could solve that issue. We know anyway that already some stakeholders have looked into that. So we don't start from scratch into also the ethical implications of AI and how to make an ethical process also in relation to certification. But I think that also one important way forward is to involve the different stakeholders, because for me, the best possible assurance, apart from the specific technical solutions that will be written, the best assurance that we can take the societal point of view, we get it right, is to make sure that different parts in the system are involved in the standardization process and can bring their own input. Because when we talk about ethical implications, we talk about, let's say, making sure that we integrate all the points of view within society that are concerned by the use of an AI system. So that is, for me, an essential point of view, which we will have to try to enforce as the best guarantee that we can take on that challenge. And then I'm very concrete also, and I close on that, Emilia, I mean, I prefer also to give a very concrete indication about the next immediate challenge, because then it's also important to look at the immediate steps. We have now a mandate which has started the pre-consultation phase. It's the mandate I was referring to before. So I think it is important that we are in a position to work constructively with the different parties involved, not only Commission, ESOs, and stakeholders and member states, to ensure that we get the planning associated with this request right. So to make sure that we have a full good overview of what is available already out there and we can make use of it. And we identify the priorities that we have to tackle, so that where the gaps stand and what are the priorities to be tackled. So I think the planning exercise we are conducting between now and the acceptance of the request by the ESOs is key. And this represents for me not only a challenge, but I would say the immediate need to face the challenges, because it's really about how we plan the work for the next 3 or 4 years ahead.
Thanks a lot, Salvatore. I think it was a very interesting also to see the status, the current status. Maybe some people from the audience were not aware. So it's very, of course, it's very relevant to see how this is actually happening and which are really, as you say, it's the time is also a matter. No, it's also something that we need to be also practical in how we implement with the time that there is. I wanted to pass the floor now to Antonio Conte, who will also has a huge experience on ICT as standardization, maybe beyond AI through other domain. He is the policy officer in DG Grow at the European Commission, and so I would like to ask Antonio for his view also, and from his experience also with other domains. So can you please, Antonio, provide also your contributions and your view and the things that from the workshop that caught your attention?
Yeah, thank you, Emilia, and good afternoon to all participants. My takeaway of this workshop is that we have really got the demonstration that data are relevant in all industrial, economic, and governance sectors. So we are talking here of a subject that is essential for the future deployment and implementation of the artificial intelligence, and in particular for the implementation of the legislation once this will be adopted. The consequence of the situation is that there is a real need for high quality data sets for interoperability and also for harmonization of certain topics. Someone of the previous speakers talked about the terminology, but certainly there are very many other topics that require this harmonization in the next activities. So all in all, once again we had the demonstration that standards and standardization will play a key role in relation to artificial intelligence. And as Salvatore also said, it's important that all interested parties are involved and will be involved in this process. I just like to underline that the recent standardization strategy that was adopted by the Commission in February has the objective to increasing the efficiency of the European standardization system. And in concrete terms, we expect also that this increased efficiency will also have a positive impact on the work that the European standardization organizations will carry out in relation to artificial intelligence. And now, you asked me to say something about what we can take also from other experiences that we had in the past. I believe that one of the major points here is related to the coordination among the European standardization organizations. So it's important that from the outset there is a clear roadmap that somehow gives a responsibility to the various organizations that are involved in these activities. Here maybe the picture is a little bit more complicated because we are talking of a European dimension. At the same time, also very many activities are also carried out at the international level. So there is a need to ensure that all this somehow fits together. A second point I would like to mention is about the participation of European experts at the international level. This is a problem due to the scarce resources that in general are available. So there is a need to somehow plan this support and ensure that the European interests and values are duly represented when discussing artificial intelligence standardization at the international level. A certain point, another point I would like to mention also is about the interplay between horizontal and vertical standardization. This is a point that was underlined by several rapporteurs of the various sessions. We clearly know that the objective of the future standardization work in this domain will be to create some general standards that will address the general principles of artificial intelligence. But at the same time, we also understand that specific sectors, can just give you the example, for instance, of e-health, may have, that was mentioned, may have some specific needs. This has to be assessed carefully, and again, this has to be planned also carefully. And finally, I would like also to mention the need to ensure a very efficient and effective coordination and cooperation with research activities, and in particular with the pre-normative research. In this respect, I have to underline that the standardization strategy anticipates that the Commission will work together towards the definition of a code of practice for researchers that should somehow guide the work of research and researchers and how to cooperate with standardization. And at the same time, we have already launched a project called HS Booster that has the objective to support the work of researchers and to ensure that when this is applicable, of course, the work of these researchers can be tested in the standardization environment. So in summary, this would be my highlights for the future work. Maybe if you have the time, then I will come back to some of these points later.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Antonio. I think very interesting. And also, as you say, that we are now in a workshop of putting science into standard. It seems that in this field is also, it's relevant also to be closer to the research part, as you mentioned, as your last point. Yeah. So I wanted to pass the floor now to David Greatshell. He is a member of the Research and Data Unit at the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. So he's also, I think, has a PhD in sociology. So he might bring also this fundamental right perspective to the topic, to the standardization work. So I would like to ask David for your perspective, also the aspect that caught your attention from the highlights that we saw, and also which will be for you the relevant concrete steps that we need to ensure in the future for standardization in trustworthy AI.
Great. Thank you very much. First of all, it's a big pleasure being here and listening to all these really great discussions and expertise in the room. And I could take many, many points that I can't all speak to them now in this few quick opening presentation. So I work for the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights. We are one of the over 40 agencies of the EU, and our main mandate is to collect data and expertise on fundamental rights issues to provide support to the EU institutions and member states on fundamental rights issues. As you know, fundamental rights are enshrined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is legally binding since 2009. It has the same value as the treaties. So this is a very high-level legally binding standard that we all have to adhere to in our work. Of course, knowing the policy making in the area, so for a couple of years, we were now engaged in doing some research and analysis and publishing papers on fundamental rights issues linked to the use of big data and artificial intelligence, highlighting several areas, most obviously privacy, data protection, but non-discrimination being at the core of the discussions, also access to an effective remedy, good administration, and so forth. So a whole lot of fundamental rights are impacted by new technologies. And we usually suggest carrying out fundamental rights impact assessments, meaning that you should look into fundamental rights issues before any AI is being deployed. And looking back at the past years, I think it's quite amazing how far we've come in the past years. And like being at a session where standardization of technology is being discussed and fundamental rights is one of the core topics of it is really a big pleasure. And I think that's really a good advantage, a good progress. And at the same time, I think we also need to acknowledge that it's not easy. So there are so many experts and people working on it, and anyone who would sell an easy solution to that, all of you know that this is not true. So I think exactly discussions like this today are one of the ways forward. So these discussions need to continue because like the experts from the different fields bring in their expertise to policy making. Of course, the work on the legal requirements is ongoing. So we have a very, very good proposal from the Commission, which is now being discussed. And what I think is important also when we speak about standardization is whenever we have the legal requirements to properly translate them into practical application. When we did our research on AI, we were speaking to companies, public administration, and we also heard it in the sessions on the GDPR, for example. Many people are still struggling to apply the legal principles in practice. And while this is, I mean, an ongoing issue on the GDPR and more clarity is needed on some aspects, I think the work also on standardization can help when the AI Act is enforced to provide clarity to those on the ground. At the same time, we also heard in our research, people are very much looking into the international level. So people are actually waiting and saying, let's see what the EU comes up with. And what we also heard from in the presentation from OECD, there are many other international organizations also working on the area. So keeping the conversation with the others like the OECD, the Council of Europe is working on it, and UNESCO to really not confuse users of AI further, but really align the discussions, but of course, everyone based on their own mandates. Hearing cooperation in the discussions, also as Salvatore mentioned, is important. I would like to highlight the relevance of civil society and the advantage of also having them on board. They have not only expertise, but also can raise good concerns that need to be heard, which can then also be brought into the discussions and only this way increase trust in the use of technology. Another point is working across disciplines, and this you could really see in the discussions. Very often people are just lost in translation. You mentioned I'm coming from social science with a classical statistical training. I had to read the books over books in computer science to understand that often we talk about the same things but just use different words. And that's a bit of an effort to be taken. And at the same time, we can really benefit from this cross expertise, as we also had in the rooms. Like in social science, what I was saying is there's really good experience in documenting data, sharing survey data, the survey archives. They have really good standards on this. Look at what Eurostat is doing and so forth. Because data quality, at least in the beginnings, was quite absent in computer science curricula. At the same time, of course, social science people can learn from computer science because they're much better in modeling things and predicting stuff. So this is then, of course, also mixed with legal questions, bias. For us, of course, it's only or mainly a concern in relation to discrimination. So if people are put at a disadvantage based on protected characteristics, and how this is then really investigated in practice clearly needs a cross-discipline discussions. Two more points and I'm done. Quickly, I also heard, I mean, not just when it's on translation of different definitions. In general, I think it's important to agree on certain definitions when we speak about standardization in the area, which was mentioned several times. Also, the definition of AI is still a bit of a discussion. In our research, we also saw that people have wildly different imaginations of what AI is. So any further clarity that is brought in this respect is really important. At the same time, also not narrowing down the definition. At the moment, we work with a very broad definition, which is really important to keep up the protection of fundamental rights. I also heard very often people want computational solutions, thresholds. I'm sure there can be some thresholds found for specific applications, but for sure not across the board. And this is also what many people said. Like discrimination happens in context. Bias may be a problem, but it's not necessarily always a problem. And here it's also to increase the experience over time to see where we really have an issue and where not. That's now the last point. So we also continue working on it. We work on a report on bias and algorithms. It should come up in autumn this year, also contributing further to the discussion. And yeah, it was just great seeing this discussion. We are not yet there, but I'm very positive feeling after all these discussions. Thank you.
Okay, David, very interesting point. I guess also this what you mentioned about the need for multidisciplinarity and also clarity on some of the concepts we have been discussing, no? Because people may have different perception what is AI, what is bias, and we need to maybe for having standards to really define things and make everyone on the same page and thing. Thanks a lot. We will continue maybe with some more questions later. I will pass the floor now to Agnès Delaborde. She has a more research background. She's a member research engineer at French Laboratoire National de Métrologie et d'Essais de Paris. Her background is more on natural language processing, also experience on human-robot interaction. So she might also give a more scientific perspective to what are the next steps and concrete steps, in particular related to data for this idea of trustworthy. Agnès, so it's your turn. I pass the screen to you.
Thank you. And I don't know if you are fluent in English, but really well done for having pronounced the name of the laboratory in French. So I'm not willing to contradict you, but we're not really the scientific side here. I'll put it clearly about what are the missions of the laboratory. So in English, it's the National Laboratory for Metrology and Testing, perhaps easier to pronounce. So LNE, we are in France. And our objective, yes, we do science, but our immediate objective is always to provide services to the industry. So our main mission is to understand and be skilled in terms of research. And indeed, we are at the origin, we are all researchers, but ensuring that it's immediately usable. by industry. So on the whole, at LNE, we are concerned by any product from the industry. So I don't know, toys, wheelbarrows, medical devices, etc. Think of any product and you may find it in our facilities. And among our activities, we've got some testing, evaluation activities. So ensuring that a product, whatever its type, is up to a certain, well, is compliant to something. I remain vague because it depends on if we're talking about standard or regulatory requirements, etc. We also have activities in terms of certification. So, well, I won't go deeper into certification. Everyone know well what it is about, and also activities in terms of metrology, so including research sciences and also legal metrology, for example. So here, concerning AI, it's for us, it's another type of products from the industry. So those products that are, well, autonomous. So it's artificial intelligence really on the whole. So devices, systems, software that can take decision at some point. So whatever the type of technology, whatever the type of algorithmic approach, whatever the type of data, whatever the type of sectors. In fact, we cover them all, in fact, no limitation in this regard. So in our activities, so we don't develop AI naturally, since we are assessing and doing certification, etc. We don't develop concurrent products. And we know that we need tools. We need tools for the evaluation, for the certification as well. And when I speak about tools, I mean it will be metrics, scores, perhaps thresholds as well. And we also need methods. We know that in the topics of trustworthy AI, many things are really subjective or linked to cultural considerations. And those can be really hard. For example, if you take them from a metrology point of view, dealing with something, I don't know, as subjective as fairness, for example, there is a big gap to fill, in fact. So our work is dedicated to designing these tools. We know that concerning the regulatory requirements, it's part of our activities of checking compliance to regulatory requirements. It's no news here for the people around the table, naturally. Regulation is coming. So we know that we are not in a process where we can automatically do some testing and it's easy, etc. We are still at the phase where we need to build these methods. From what I found really interesting here, so first, just to let you know, I couldn't attend the other discussions. I just had the synthesis and it was good. I'm not going to raise the debate again, naturally. But I found it interesting that I saw that several activities were described as easy and important. So I didn't take part to the discussion, so I don't know the argumentation behind. But to me, for example, specialized data sets for testing biases. It was put in the easy, and for me, wow, no, it's a big task. At LNE, for example, we do testing, and we know that having one database to which we can use for testing several applications and products could be ideal, but we know it doesn't work. So we've explored this topic of building a reference test database. The conclusion is quite easy. No, not a specialized database. I couldn't find any case where one database could fully be used for another product. It's not exactly meant for the same application, for the same users. It's not built the same way, needing other features, etc. So the best way would be to have some top-level characteristics. But also, I heard it in another part of the workshop, apparently, when it was talked about data passport and model, perhaps it's what was thought behind that, the notion of top-level characteristics. So I find it, well, interesting and raising many debates. So it was really interesting to hear. I noted as well some points that are really important for us in our activities. It was in healthcare. Apparently, it has been said that it's better to go towards methodology, so methods, rather than thresholds and metrics. And well, I know the European New Approach Directive strategy. I know the fact that we should not hinder innovation and putting something too strict. But I know as well that in many domains, when safety is at stake, threshold are important. Metrics are, it's not something that prevents innovation, but it limits risk. If you see, for example, in safety components, they don't have fixed thresholds, but it's depending on the context and the case, you must do enough testing to reach a level of error rate. So in my opinion, it should be modulated, and I think it would be wise, in fact, to do that. So, well, it can be good on my side. I know that we'll have other questions afterwards. So thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Agnes. So it was very interesting perspective, this idea of the need for testing, and also practical tools that was also mentioned by Emilia, especially when you are trying to do practical certification. And this is, I think, one of the challenges of this standardization part. So last but not least, I would like to invite Philippe Sanova from the Confédération Française Démocratique du Travail. And he's also an ETUC expert in GTC 21. So Philippe, I would like to ask you also from this labor perspective, which are, because I think we guessed we had a panel on specifically on labor and education, but in general on the aspects that caught your attention from your particular interests, and also what you think are the concrete steps towards the future in this area.
Thank you, Emilia. Good afternoon to all. As you mentioned, I'm a member of the French trade union, the Confédération Française Démocratique du Travail, but here I speak on behalf of the ETUC, the European Trade Union Confederation, which gather 92 trade unions from 39 European countries. And as a member of ETUC, I happen to attend the standardization bodies on artificial intelligence, both at the European level, Sensenelec, and at ISO. Of course, for us as trade unionists, we are not for or against in the artificial intelligence. AI exists in the worker's life, and we have to work with it. We know that AI may bring a lot of benefits in terms of easing the workload, in terms of improving the company's profitability, in terms of allowing people to focus on the core of their job. So this is undisputed, but also AI presents some risk. And if we want AI to be accepted at the workplace, we must mitigate those risks. I'm happy that the main 3 points I had the intention to develop have been already reported by the panelists. Those 3 points are: first, training; second, social dialogue; and third, the human rights issues. Regarding training, it has been highlighted by several groups, the group of on employment, on education, also the group on industrial automation. We need to have workers trained not only on AI itself, but we need to also think that many jobs will be transformed by AI. Maybe not so many jobs will be directly deleted by AI, not so many jobs will be directly created by AI, but almost all jobs will be transformed, and we must be ready as workers to survive and to benefit from the transformation. And also, as it was mentioned by one of the reporters, there is a kind of imbalance of power between the employer and the employee in terms of AI. And to restore the balance, we must have workers better trained on what is AI and how to better use it. The second point will be, of course, for us important that the AI should be the subject of social dialogue between employers and employees. At the minimum, the workers and the employees should be informed on what happens in their companies on AI, but also they should be consulted on the best way to implement it and how to implement it. The glass is half full and half empty on that side. I will concentrate more on the half full glass with two nice recent notices. First, earlier this year, there was a frame agreement signed on digitization between between Business Europe, between our union, the E2UC, between SME United, and between the union representative of public employers. And this frame agreement deals with some issues to be addressed when deploying AI. It's a good example of the type of dialogue which may be introduced between employers and employees. And the second good news, and this was just mentioned by Antonio Conte, is the publication by the European Commission of their strategy on standardization, which was made by Commissioner Breton last February. And in this strategy, the EU insists on the inclusiveness and the involvement of civil society. So not only us as workers, but also the representative of SMEs, like Emilia mentioned. Also, I heard the reporter on medicine and healthcare mentioning inclusiveness for the patients. So civil society, also the consumers. So those standards will only be efficient if they involve more public, more participants, than it has been the case so far with Sensenelec. And of course, there is nobody especially at charge for the situation, but we have to make improvement on both sides. The third point relates to the whole issues dealing with human rights at large, as reminded much a bit earlier by David Reichel, for example. So when I refer to human rights, I may refer to undue surveillance of the workers made possible by AI tools. I refer to bias and discrimination, which has been mentioned by several reporters. I mentioned to the risk of privacy. Many of the reporters have insisted on the accuracy of data and the representativeness of data, either test data or development data. But there is also a huge risk of breach of workers' privacy by using their data out of context or not erasing the data when they are no longer needed, etc. Another key point on trustworthiness is the need to have human in control. We should never have a decision purely made by an AI tool, but at each stage, the right to contest a decision. So the third point of trustworthiness, I think, needs to be addressed, and we have specific interest as workers' representatives to discuss it. Finally, when we discuss the standards, I will keep in mind three types of standards where we have to work in Europe. First, it has been mentioned by several groups, definitions. What is trustworthiness? What is a bias? What is AI, even somebody mentioned? So having a common language between all European participants, and it is not easy. And of course, at ISO level, which is that it is even more difficult with participants from Asia, from the America. Second point, the accuracy and the privacy of data. On third point, all that regards trustworthiness. And in looking at the standards at the Sensenelec, we have also to be aware of what happens at ISO. This is why it is so important to have some link between the job made at international level and the job made at the EU level, because Europe has specific values to protect, but it's not an isolated land. And that's it for me.
Okay. Thanks, Philippe, for your input. I think, as you mentioned, these 3 points, I mean, and also this idea of training has been repeatedly, and was also one question from the audience about that. How can this be tackled? So this will be really something we can discuss. So after this first round of intervention by different panelists, I would like to remind the audience that they can add questions or vote for question in our Slido, and I will now go again through our panelists and ask maybe additional questions, and some of them from the audience that are there. For instance, Emilia, there was I wanted to get back a little bit to the issue of data quality, especially the SMEs do some work on data quality, and also if you could comment a little bit on the work of the SME Alliance on this respect. And there was a question also from the audience, some people that were asking how they can take part in technical committees on AI. So how does it work? Maybe from someone that is in an SME, how they could get engaged at this. So these are two questions I wanted to ask you.
Thank you, Emilia. So I will handle first the first question, which was on data quality. As mentioned, and as the link provided shown, SMEs, we have this European Digital SME Alliance, where we have more than 20,000 SMEs all over Europe. And we should not forget that SMEs represent more than 90% of companies in Europe. This is a specificity. We have diversity, and we have this inclusiveness which is needed, because SMEs, they are a large part of it. So how we do organize? We have the European Digital SME Alliance, and inside we have the focus group on artificial intelligence and the new task group on data. So I provided the links to both of them and also to the agenda. So the ones that would like to engage, they can engage. In the focus group on AI, we have 200 members, and some of them, they are forerunners. So they come from academia, as myself, and we are spin-offs of the universities. Or we are just spin-offs, even if they didn't come out directly from the university, but they come with an academic background in artificial intelligence. The way that you can engage at this, so we have in technical committees on artificial intelligence, we have the European committees, we have national mirror committees, and we have international committees. In order to engage with technical standardization, one first needs to go to the national body. So the national body would be able to register them to the European level. In artificial intelligence, we have CENELEC, Joint Technical Committee 21, and ETSI, which is treating more securing artificial intelligence. So this is to answer the second question inside the first one. And at the international level, there are several initiatives horizontally, the most relevant being ISO IEC. This is a Joint Technical Committee 1, Subcommittee 42, Artificial Intelligence, many working groups there. So in order to engage, please go to the national body, then they will register you either at the European level, either the international level, or both. In Luxembourg, we have this registration, which is for free, and I encourage all scientists to do so, because it is an important part of putting science into practice. Then on the Digital SME Alliance, because we're small and medium enterprises, in order to have a voice, we inside the focus group on AI, we have made a fact sheet. What is our position? So we made consultation to the members, and through the surveys, we concluded what are the main points, and I will mention only those on data. So on data, as mentioned previously, we found the Recital 44, Article 10, paragraph 3, which is our free and complete data, which is, as it was already mentioned by the different panels previously, it is really difficult, and it is sector specific, and there are many challenges. Then when we go to what the legislative act, the AI Act, when the proposal will become a legislative act, and it will come into force, we have a specificity for SMEs, which is tailor-made data analysis. Why people go usually towards SMEs is because they have agile approaches and they are able to do analysis tailor-made. While larger companies, they will come with a whole process. And that might not fit conformity assessment. So we saw it as a challenge, and for that reason, we get engaged, and currently I'm the convener of the working group handling conformity assessment. And since 2 years, we were handling that together with Ansgar Körne on an ad hoc group. So this, we do not do it only as a focus group for SMEs. We take advantage of the partnership we have with small business standards. So we do it in an organized way. And the fact sheet, it is a common position. We have on one side scientists and practitioners. On the other side, we have experts on standardization. So we mix all together, and this is where we come with our positioning. I do take note also of important work of synchronizing what we're doing in Europe. SMEs, they tend to be more regional, or they tend to stay in Europe. But we need to be open also to the international, as Antonio mentioned previously, open internationally. And we have an important work which is done by Philippe, which is in working group 2. He's mapping what are the requirements which will be answered from the international level if we do conformity assessment on products and services. What are international standardization that we could apply? Yeah, I think you already mentioned. So data is perceived in the AI system, again, as part of the process, and we treat it inside the AI process. So data quality is a complex topic. From the perspective of SMEs, we extracted only these two conclusions: tailor-made data analysis and error-free and complete data as challenges, and the proposed solutions we had at the beginning. Hope it
Okay, thanks. Yes, thank you a lot, Emilia. I saw also that there are some links to the national bodies that you mentioned on the slide for the people interested. So yeah, as it has been mentioned several times, we need a lot of support and involvement from European researchers and SMEs in order to represent a bit our vision into the standardization process. So I will move now to Salvatore Scalzo because I wanted him to develop a little bit more on priorities. Which are the priorities of the Commission in terms of AI standardization? And also how can we ensure that maybe the outcomes of this workshop can feed the standardization activities under the AI Act? So Salvatore, can you just give us some more concrete steps on the priorities that you see that are in the short term?
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Emilia. As I said, I already referred to that in the previous question. For me, the most concrete priorities now is clearly to get a solid standardization mandate and to ensure that together with the ISOs and with the fundamental input of the stakeholders and the member states, we are in a position to, let's say, draw up and rely on a solid plan for the future standardization activities which realize the expectations of the mandate. That is, in a few words, what is the priority there. And if you ask me about the areas of priorities, as you can see from the mandate, and I think this is also an important concept because there is sometimes some misjudgment there or some misunderstandings. Of course, as you could see for, let's say, some could see already in the pre-consultation phase, that the pre-consultation phase still is addressed to specific stakeholders and to member states experts and the ISOs, but basically the areas of priorities refer, because we have built on the essentials of the AI Act, the technical areas underpinning the requirements that we have set in the in the AI Act for the high-risk AI systems. Those are, for us, the areas of priorities. And I must say also, it's difficult to prejudge and to preempt the future, to predict the future, but I could say that on the areas that we have identified in our requirements, also looking at the discussions with the community, with the member states and with the parliament, I do not think that there are fundamental disagreements on the fact that what we have identified in the requirements are the key concerns in relation to high-risk AI systems. So basically, the standardization, also in the future AI Act, and we've started on that basis, we look at the requirements of the AI Act plus the conformity assessment and the quality management system. Those are, for us, let's say, the key areas of interest. And I was saying before, there is sometimes a misunderstanding because people say, are we expected also to carry out a risk classification in standardization? So there, perhaps, I mean, this panel offers me the opportunity also to clarify that. It is evident that in the AI Act, from a regulatory perspective, we have identified, let's say, 4 main risk categories, which goes from the prohibited practices up to what we consider as AI systems which do not pose any risks. And that is, let's say, the kind of risk classification we have set from a regulatory perspective, also in order to make and create a corresponding enforcement instrument, right? So which could go from prohibition to no mandatory, to codes of conduct, let's say, just to be very clear. But the standardization, so what is the priority for standardization for us? Because also of the concept that has been mentioned several times in this discussion of the NLF framework and the harmonized standards, will be the second risk level which we have identified. So that is the scope of standardization, the high risk AI systems. And within that scope, of course, we are aware that not all high-risk AI systems may present the specific, the same risks with regard, for example, to cybersecurity. So within the high-risk AI systems, I may expect that, for example, I make the example of cybersecurity because it is quite relevant, I believe. There could be, let's say, a certain risk classification to be carried out, but the scope of reference remains the high-risk AI system, because for them we have set mandatory requirements to be demonstrated and verified at the level of the pre-market phase. So I think this is important. So to distinguish the risk classification in the AI Act versus, let's say, the risk assessment that may be identified in the context of standardization. I think these are, let's say, the main things I wanted to say. There is probably your final question, which is how we ensure that also the discussion in this panel could fit the standardization process. I think that we are in an advantage position here, if I may say. I mean, and I'm thinking also as a, let's say, in an advantage position because we have this panel has been organized and attended by commission services, by standardization organizations. So we are, and also participated by many people that are already in the standardization committees, notably for data. So for me, this is already the good recipe to make sure that the conclusions and the outcomes can be appropriately integrated into the work which is ongoing. Maybe another thought that I would have, and I would definitely support, at least from the position of my services, but I mean, the fact that we work on a daily basis with JRC, that basically we work together on standards and on many other issues also related to the AI Act, is to probably to monitor the outcomes of the PSIS. So for me, it would be ideal if we could try to, let's say, follow up the outcomes and verify after a certain X period how the main conclusions that we could draw from the discussions of these days have been actually integrated. For me, the word follow up and monitoring remains fundamental in this respect. So I would definitely welcome the possibility, and once again, we would be fully open to support this process from our side to see how, and given the importance of the data quality in the context of the AI Act, is to see how the discussions of this workshop could concretely have been integrated in X months from now already in the context of the discussion at the level of the standardization committee. So that would be a bit in between a proposal and a thought, but I think that would be really probably the best, one of the best possible scenarios that we could think of to make sure that we can take full advantage of the results and the discussions of these days.
Okay, thanks a lot, Salvatore. Yeah, you mentioned then the focus on the requirements for the high-risk system, also on the conformity assessment and the quality management, and also, yeah, I think it's true that in this panel we have representation of all stakeholders and many people. So we try to follow up. I'm sure there's at least one report that will be issued from the conclusions of the workshop that could be taken further in this discussion. Let me now pass to Antonio. Antonio, because there were some questions I wanted to ask you from the audience, and for instance, maybe two questions that there were from the audience. The first one, some researchers were interested in the support to be involved in standardization and pre-normative research, and they wanted to know if you could provide a little bit more information. And the other question was raised by Claudius Griesinger, because he agrees with the need for coordination and roadmap of EU and international standardization, but what do you think will be the best platform or framework for tackling this coordination?
Yeah, thank you for the two interesting questions. Regarding the first one, I shared in the chat the link to the HS Booster project. So I believe that all interested people who want to apply for some support, and according to the specific rules of the project and the calls that the project has published and will publish in future, can just rely on the website of the project and follow the instructions that are contained there. In future, there will be also other opportunities, but this is not yet decided. What I can tell you is that certainly the relationship between research, development, innovation, and standardization is quite high now in the political agenda. And so there is a clear interest from the European institutions to ensure that let's say the synergies between standardization and pre-normative research can be even better exploited in future. So I would say that for the time being, the HS Booster project is the reference. There is another project called standict.eu that is actually providing support for European experts for participation in international activities. So maybe the participants in this workshop may also have an interest to visit the website of standict.eu. Concerning your second question, I believe that this debate about the coordination is in the hands of the JTC 21, that is the Joint Technical Committee of CENSELEC, that is addressing artificial intelligence standardization at European level. As you know, there are agreements between CENSELEC and ISO-IEC in order to coordinate the regional and international standardization work. So this is somehow in the hands of CENSELEC and in the roadmap that JTC 21 will develop at the European level. Maybe there is a need also to ensure that the European participants will have a better dialogue regarding needs, priorities. But I guess that this is something that can be done through JTC 21 because JTC 21 has a very large participation. I guess that almost all national standardization bodies are involved in their activities. So there is really a good way to ensure that all different interests and positions are well represented at the European level. So in summary, I would say that the situation is rather clear. JTC 21 is the European hub for standardization, and through the agreements between CEN and CENELEC and ISO-IEC, this coordination then can also be exported at the international level.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Antonio. Now I wanted to maybe ask David, Rachel, because we have talked about in this workshop a lot about universality of data sets that we need to evaluate bias and fairness, and for that, of course, we need to collect data and collect demographic data, and this is some personal data. And I was reading a paper about characterizing the risk of demographic data collection in the pursuit of fairness that will be presented in ACM FAT conference, and it reveals a bit the risks of this data collection, even for the purpose of monitoring. And but on the one hand, we need to collect, on the other hand, we need to protect. So I would like to know your view on how important is to collect data on this kind of protected characteristics, such as ethnic origin, gender, or religion, when analyzing biases in data set. And also, how do you say should be the approach? Because, for instance, in our team, we as researchers have always this tension between, okay, we want to reproduce our research and have this data, and we want to also protect data. So how do you see this issue from the fundamental rights perspective?
Great. Thank you for a not so easy question, but important one nevertheless. Of course, I mean, a huge part of the Fundamental Rights Agency's work is collecting data, including protected characteristics, for the very purpose to highlight issues of discrimination. So as many people said, I mean, bias is really still a very broad term and can be seen in many aspects, but it really becomes a problem if it puts people at a disadvantage based on their protected characteristics. The list of protected characteristics included in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, Article 21, it's pretty long. It's a good list. I mean, it's not just like gender or age or ethnic origin. It's also, you know, political views, genetic features, sexual orientation, social background standards, and so forth. So it's a long list, and it is really important in investigating bias, like what can really be found in the data set that links to these protected characteristics. So because many people think if you don't have this information in the data set, it will not lead to discrimination. We now know that there's a lot of information potentially included that can easily highly correlate with those protected characteristics, and this way really put people at a disadvantage. So I think collecting this information is important, but at the same time it's sensitive. It's a bit of a balancing act of different fundamental rights, data protection on the one hand, non-discrimination on the other hand. I also don't think it is a problem as such, although, as I mentioned before, there is still some uncertainty of people on how to apply the GDPR. As I don't see the GDPR as a big problem in collecting those data. The thing is, of course, you cannot easily collect data on protected characteristics. There is, of course, also a provision in the proposed AI Act, Article 10.5, which should provide a legal basis for collecting those data for the very purpose of discrimination monitoring. And I think, I mean, this provision can help providing some clarity as a legal basis. At the same time, it's important to highlight that it works on the basis of strict necessity, meaning that you have to have a reason, a justification why you actually need to collect this data. And this again links to an assessment in advance. And I think, I mean, here further work on clarifying the aspects also in the standardization work can help. For example, if you want to develop an algorithm in the field of education, you may not have certain information linked to disabilities of certain students, and you think it's a real problem, and then you need to make the case that this risk exists, and then you can justify the collection of those data. So it's unfortunately, of course, not an easy one, because companies or public administration shouldn't start collecting these protected sensitive characteristics as such. And the second point that is relevant for this is that it's not only to justify why this is needed, there also need to be strong safeguards included in the collection. This means you just don't add information on ethnic origin to your data set, but you can collect it maybe for a limited period of time. You have to delete the data after a certain while, like retention period. You have to store them separately. You can only use them for the purpose of discrimination analysis, and so forth. So it remains a tricky undertaking, but it is even more relevant because only with more specified analysis, it is possible to also find out where are the problems. And actually, over time, we will learn that some applications are actually quite safe, but others are really problematic. And that also links to some of the limitations of mitigation, that some aspects won't work in the end.
Okay, David, it's really a difficult question, I guess, but you managed to reflect on the tension also and the balance that we need to follow. We have 5 minutes left, and I wanted to have two last questions, one to Agnes and one to Philippe. First to Agnes, maybe about the relationship between data and AI. So how do you see also from your experience in GTC 21, and because you are trying to get a unified approach for AI trustworthiness characteristics. So how do you think the outcome of this workshop could help for this understanding better the relationship between data and AI, and because sometimes we talk about both together. So I would like to ask you your take home messages from that side.
Okay, I understand that we don't have much time left. I'll try to be quick, no trouble. So yes, I didn't mention it before. I talked only on the of the LNE, but I'm also involved and I'm the convener of a group at the GTC 21, another group. Our objective is to explore to what extent we can design a standard to help understand and unify the notion of trustworthiness for AI. The main observation, it might be personal, but my observation and my motivation for that is that the AI Act, the draft AI Act, plus many other European sources presents the importance of safe and trustworthy AI. And from my point of view at LNE, I see the emergence of a market of trustworthy AI. And so people selling trustworthy AI and putting it, using the word trustworthy and trustworthiness. So in my own opinion, it must be at some point written somewhere what is trustworthiness. It cannot be used in any ways, any uncontrolled ways. So my personal motivation for doing these works. So in the idea of the work of the potential future standard, it would be to understand really in the European view what are the characteristics of trustworthiness. And naturally, we're talking here of AI in our group, but soon, and well, from the very beginning of it, we thought, okay, AI, but what about data? And we saw during the workshop here that yes, there is a natural link between trustworthiness and data. So we also observed it, but we don't exactly know what is important in data to ensure the trustworthiness of AI. I do understand from the synthesis of the workshop that it's not clear yet still, but we would need in our group and in our reflection some inputs. And from what I understood here from the synthesis, and I know it was only on 2 days, etc., but to me, it's highly coherent. For example, in our group, we knew and we guess that, for example, data transparency, it's really important in specific cases for the trustworthiness of AI. But data transparency, it's one characteristic, one property among many others. And I see, and I heard during the synthesis that there are some other properties. There are absence of bias, fairness, and quality, naturally. And here, we're not trying to do a standard on all the characteristics. I mean, going into details on all the characteristic and specific aspects of each element. So naturally, data, we're not going to do 100 pages on what is data quality. So we must have some top level properties of all the properties of data that impact the trustworthiness of AI. So I think that, well, the workshop does not provide an answer, but provides a track. And I was really relieved and glad to see that all the topics, the most important topics, that were linked to providing clear definition, but, and it was really important for me, not only definition, not only saying, okay, we all agree, it means data capability is that. No, bringing tools. If we are talking of standard, we cannot just say things, we cannot just explain things, we must give some methods, some metrics, possibly, so some tools. So this is what I find encouraging. It's going in a similar direction, and it means that those works could be used when we talk about AI only. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Agnes. I think it was very interesting. We don't have much time, but I would just wanted to ask Philippe a last question, because and it's totally different topic a bit, but I wanted to conclude a bit with this multicultural perspective, because we have seen there's a need to have a different disciplines, different vocabulary, but also different cultures. Europe is a multicultural place where, and Philippe talked about AI for workers and how they will impact. But I wanted to ask him if trustworthiness may have maybe different meanings for different people or different cultures. So I wanted to ask him if we can really have metrics or tools, or if there is a challenge also from the cultural side to define this trustworthiness idea.
There are several elements in trustworthiness. I try to quote it briefly. First, we have transparency and explainability. People must understand what the tool does. Second, people will have trust in the system if human is in control. So we need to find a way to measure how human is in control, how we have right to contest the decision. Third, we have the data privacy issues. They have been exposed by David Greitshell. I won't come back on it. So we have to work on data. Also, we have mentioned a lot of time bias. What is a bias? Probably the definition of bias is the same worldwide, but the way to handle it is not the same. Also, we have the question of undue surveillance, which is probably very different among different parts of the world. And we have also a new concept in impact assessment, which is what is called bore out. If you're working with an AI, you could lose interest in your own work because you are simply a slave of the AI tool. So we have to measure trustworthiness based on these criteria: transparency, privacy, bias, bore out, surveillance, human in control. And the challenge is to find nice standards on that. Regarding specifically workers, we are happy that the AI application at work have been classed as high risk at the EU level in the draft standard, in the draft AI Act published 1 year ago. What will be probably a key point for us will be the assessment of how these high risk applications are handled. And probably we have already expressed some disagreement with the Commission. We think that those high-risk applications should not be only self-assessed by the companies, but should be, in some cases, the object of third-party assessment. And our challenge at the SN is to find the right standards to define the impact assessment, the conformity assessment. We are working on that.
Okay, thanks a lot, Philippe. So I think this concludes the time that we had allocated to this panel. So very interesting notes that I talk about the need for definitions and also the need for cooperation between researchers, SMEs, standardization bodies, the need for multidisciplinarity. Also, we mentioned that there's also a challenge to create tools and certification material, evaluation material, and then also this trend between horizontal and sectorial standards. So I think a lot of food for thought for the coming discussion. And I would like to thank again to all the panelists for very nice discussions, and to all the attendees for the questions and for their time. And I pass the floor, I think, to Alexandra, that will take and introduce the final speakers. So thanks a lot to all.
Thank you very much, Emilia, and thank you to all the speakers in the last panel. And a general big thank you to all the speakers and all the panelists during the past 2 days for the extremely rich discussions, the wealth of ideas, and also the wealth of perspectives that have been shared. I think we have seen that there has been a lot done so far, and much remains to be done also to address the challenges with the data quality regarding AI systems and beyond. And I am really glad from my side, and I speak from the whole organization team, that we were able to all come together and look at this together, and hopefully continue to do so. I would also like to acknowledge, before I give the floor to Mrs. Elena Santiago Cid, to close this workshop, I would like to acknowledge the organizing team because many of us have not been seen on the screen, but there has been a lot of work done in the past 5 months, I think, to organize this workshop. So I would like to just extend thank you on behalf of everyone to Olivia Mian and Philip Maurer from Senelec, and my colleagues Isabelle Dupont, Andreas Janet, Maurizio Salvi, Josep Soler Garrido, and Songul Tolan for all the organizational aspects. Thank you so much. And now I would like to pass the floor to Mrs. Elena Santiago Cid, who is the SEN and Senelec Director General, for the closing remarks. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. There is always human intelligence behind anything that we do in this world. So I'm very pleased with your thank you note to all the brains that have been behind this event. I really would like to thank all the workshop participants. I think these have been 2 days of very intense and very fruitful discussions with many aspects that have been raised on the benefit of artificial intelligence, dealing with the ethical and legal challenges that come with this disruptive technology. Artificial intelligence have indeed the potential to improve our lives as well as the overall economic and societal welfare. And this is also the objective of standards, of producing standards. They can lead to better healthcare services, safer and cleaner transport systems, better working conditions, higher productivity, and new innovative products, services, and supply chain. Artificial intelligence systems are being deployed every day, affecting every aspect of our lives, with applications such as recommender systems for medical diagnostics, bank loan approvals, or CV filtering. So it's really very close to every day. Recently, academic research on data quality and artificial intelligence and machine learning has received increased attention. Bias and existing state-of-the-art AI models have been widely proven, raising concerns on societal consequences. And this is again something that is very close to the heart of the European standardization system that is evolving and has evolved to a really inclusive system where societal aspects need to be duly taken into consideration in the standards for the new generation that we produce. Researchers are intensively working on methods to eliminate bias, starting from the input data and by curating AI model training. However, there is still a lot of work to be done. For example, no common approach to measure data quality has yet been identified. And listening also to Emilia, I discovered that there is a lot of work that we need to do in order to address all the needs that have been identified and quoted today in this excellent exchange and also from yesterday's discussions. The European Standardization Strategy, the one that has been published by the European Commission in February 2022, have identified as a priority the need for European standards for data enhancing, data interoperability, data sharing, and data reuse. And these have been identified as a clear priority in the annual Union Work Programme for Standardization. Putting science into standards has been also an event that has been highlighted in the European Standardization Strategy published by the Commission. It acknowledged the important foresight exercise that explores standardization needs linked to emerging technologies. This is the objective of this kind of initiative, so that we can really scout for standardization needs, connect with the research community, and make sure that we can anticipate the needs of our economy and our society, and try to make those needs on concrete solutions, to transform those needs into concrete solutions to support the economy and the society. The objective of the workshop today in particular has been to map existing and missing standardization efforts and to recommend steps to start the process of drafting new standards. We needed and wanted to hear from AI practitioners and researchers about the current challenges you are facing and what methods have been developed to evaluate and mitigate bias present in artificial intelligence. The ultimate objective is to initiate a discussion on how current and future standards can be used to mitigate bias in AI models. The efforts to standardize AI systems are in full swing. Standards in the field of AI can and will promote the transfer of technologies from research to the market. We are learning to do that, and we have been pretty successful in doing that in other areas. A most important benefit from European standards is to secure the establishment of uniform and consensus-based agreements with requirements that support the implementation of the legislation that underpin our European ethics and values. This event is very timely because on top of the European standardization strategy and part of it, there is a task force that has been established between the European Commission and the 3 ESOs, and we are actually working on one work stream that is called strategic alignment. What we are trying to do in the strategic alignment work stream is to bring into line the bottom-up approach, where we are all included, experts, academia, researchers, business, societal stakeholders, and the top-down public policies and legislators, so that we can work together with common understanding and common targets that will really reinforce coordinated and much more successful approach to the deployment of policy and legislation in Europe. One of the pilots that we have identified and agreeing to move forward is AI, is artificial intelligence. And the objective is to develop a roadmap, a European standardization roadmap. All the rich exchange and information that we have got here today is going to be a very, very valuable and useful tool to be brought to the roadmap on artificial intelligence. So thank you very much also for contributing to this exercise. Part of the alignment consists on better and earlier communication so that we can anticipate together, and the current consultation of the draft standardization request for European standards in support of the Artificial Intelligence Act that is addressing safety and trustworthiness of AI systems can be a very concrete and successful example of the importance of anticipation to be able to deliver timely solutions, solutions that reach the market at the right time, and that have been addressing common definition, common understanding, and that can really help us to move forward and to support the economy and the society. In CENEL, we will carefully vet outcomes of this workshop and make sure that data quality aspects identified and reflected in the discussions are also reflected in the work program of the relevant technical bodies. Like, for instance, the work program of our CEN-CENELEC Joint Technical Committee 21, and I think we have heard a lot from 21 during these 2 days. Domain-specific characteristics may require specific standards that are adapted to the particularities and requirements of specific industries and applications. I think this is a challenge that we're all facing, how we can establish the right matrix between horizontal and vertical sectors, aspects, and matters. And this requires and can only be achieved through cooperation between experts and technical bodies that are focused on specific sectors that avoid overlaps and help to reduce inconsistencies between horizontal and vertical standards. We also have the possibility to exploit our collective European strength in ISO and IC, the international standards developing organizations. CEN and CENELEC members send experts to the ISO IC JTC1 subcommittee 42. This is a very complex committee joint established between ISO and IC, and they have a lot of subcommittees. And subcommittee 42 is the one that is dealing with artificial intelligence. And they are just initiating the work on specific standards for data quality and bias. We will certainly seize opportunities to work with like-minded international partners to bring the European angle at the international level and to ensure Europe can act as a global standard setter. The European standardization process will always ensure inclusiveness and full representation of all stakeholders, exploiting the connection we have with industry, SMEs, representatives, civil society, and academia. This event has been an important occasion to build a stronger engagement of experts in AI standardization, who can be ready to contribute to the development of technical standards that already needed to support the market deployment of artificial intelligence systems in accordance with the EU's Artificial Intelligence Act. But we have just started the discussions. We want to provide the opportunity to keep you all up to date, that you further engage in the development of European standards. We want to share with you the next steps to support the timely availability of data standards for artificial intelligence. I think that Emilia has made a beautiful summary of the outcome of the discussions. If I recall well, we have been referring to the need to develop standards for creating AI systems, like standards for management, data quality, system security, balance, not bias, standards for deployment, understanding, trust, consistent application, standards for operational testing, standards for data quality measurement, and standards for certification of AI algorithms, something that has already started in CEN. There is also a request to work on standards for deployment of AI systems. We have heard the need to have definitions that are common, so to work on the terminology, to understand what trustworthy means, so that we can also ensure a fair use of those terminology and those wording while integrating them in the standards and while applying them in the market. Education and training, AI semantics, meaning, intent, application, an approach for designing and planning AI systems, data needs, bias measurement, mitigation. Design, standards that can oversight AI systems by authorities, and standards for deployment. Data, creating data sets for artificial intelligence, data provenance, collection, presentation, minimum criteria, origin, using and sharing data. This was again something that was in the list of priorities of the annual Union Work Program 2022. Finally, we have also identified from the discussions during these 2 days the need to develop standards supporting take-up and use of artificial intelligence by our industry. Law enforcement, gatekeeping, facial recognition, image quality, to help SMEs to enable access to AI systems by all types of organizations and entities. industrial automation and robotics, safety of AI systems, all sectors, quality of the-self AI models, finance, data fairness, decision-making process, media, aspects of bias in AI for media, comparison of different AI models, benchmarkings and of data sets, definitions of bias and quality specific for media, codification of existing best practices. And finally, healthcare, regulatory situation, GDPR, medical devices regulation, data-related provisions for regulatory authorities, legal compliance, diverse range of use cases, harmonization, terminology, anonymization of data, extremely important, personalization of it. So you have given us a full bulk of ideas, concepts, not only food for thought, but more than that, basis to continue our discussions and work together with all those stakeholders that are interested in developing European standards. This event also marked a very important anniversary for the cooperation between CEN-CENELEC and the JRC working together. And I can only say that it's getting better and better. I want to thank all my colleagues also that have been working behind the scene. Those have been already mentioned by Alexandra from the CEN-CENELEC Management Center and also from the JRC. And above all, I would like to thank all of those that have participated in these 2 days discussions. And I really strongly encourage you to keep working close with the standardization. And if you are not working yet, please start working with the standardization. It will be extremely rewarding. This will ensure that the development of the standards meet stakeholders' needs, meet the needs of all of them, all of those that need to use those standards. And we will all help to protect the fundamental values and principles that we all want for Europe. Thank you very much, and I hope you had a very good evening.
Thank you.